Welcome to the party, pal. This
Wow.
is Fountainhead Forum 37. I have Larry Bowen, who served in the U.S. Navy for 21 years, and he was also on board the USS Liberty when it was attacked by Israel on June 8th,
8th.
1967.
That's correct.
1967. So Larry's going to talk about his naval career, his activism, and of course, he's going to talk about that fateful day. How are you, Larry?
I'm doing well. I
Okay,
just recovering from right hip surgery. So
that's good. Yeah.
uh,
So let's start from the beginning. Where you started. When did you join the Navy exactly? Where are you
uh,
from originally?
originally I'm from Western New York, a little town called Waterloo,
Okay.
and I joined the Navy in March of 1965, primarily because I had already received my draft notice. I had to go take the Army physical,
Yep.
and so I wanted to have a choice rather than just be shuffled off to Vietnam. So little
That's
did
smart.
I little did I know that I was going to see my own action 2 years later in the Eastern Mediterranean.
Yeah, I guess that was a smart move. At least going into the Navy would have kept you out of probably at least out of the jungles because you're going to
Yeah,
stay on that. Although you might end up on the submarines, which is probably a fate worse than anything from what I hear. But
uh,
yeah. So you started in '65. That was assumed right out of high school, or
uh, almost a year after high school, I graduated in '64.
yeah.
I was working for an electronics firm in Seneca Falls, New York, and got my draft notice and said, "Uh oh, what now, Coach?" So
Yeah.
I went off to talk to the Navy recruiter, and he said, "Go take the Army physical, and if you pass, we'll put you in the Navy." And the
Yes,
rest is history.
probably the same physical, I suppose. But so you got into the Navy in '65. So you basically saw got so by the time leading up to the events with the U.S. Can you tell me about the events leading up to your deployment on this ship with the USS Liberty? When did you get on the USS Liberty?
I got on the Liberty in March of 1966, uh, and our normal cruising for the USS Liberty was off the western coast of Africa. So I had done 3 cruises prior to the faithful one there that the faithful one, not faithful,
Yes.
uh, that occurred in June of 1967. So leading up to that, I had gone through basic training. I'd gone through cryptologic radioman school down in Pensacola, Florida, and I'd been assigned one duty station over in Bremerhaven, Germany. And while in Germany, that's when I received my orders for the Liberty.
Okay. So what was your rank by then?
I was an E4. And I became an E5 on board the ship prior to the attack. So I was, a second class petty officer and considered to be one of their supervisors for what we called Radio Research One. That was the communications operations center that we worked in as radiomen.
That's you got to E5 in 2 years. That's pretty impressive. You must have been a good man.
Uh, I guess I just played my cards right and studied for the test. Back then, you had to take a test, and our rank was very competitive. They they actually had quotas every year, so you might pass the test and still not get picked up. Um,
Yeah. So only the top 10% or something like that would get promoted then. So
exactly, exactly.
yeah, that's not always fair, but there's only so much money you can budget. You only need so many people at a certain level. So, so
Hmm.
you got onto the USS Liberty in March, and you were in Germany at the time, or West
Uh,
Germany at the time.
yes. Yep.
Yeah. So then you flew down to the USS Liberty, or they shipped you down to the USS Liberty? I suppose
Yeah,
you ended up on the boats a lot.
flew back to Norfolk, Virginia.
Yeah.
Picked up the ship in Norfolk.
So you
Yep.
sailed across the Atlantic from Norfolk, and or well, not sailed, but rowed a boat across the Atlantic and got into the Mediterranean. So when did you guys arrive in the Mediterranean Sea?
Uh, it was probably June 2nd. We got our orders on May 23rd to go up into the Med,
Yeah.
and we steamed from where we were off of the coast of Africa up to Rota, Spain to pick up supplies, and then got into the Med probably right around June 1st or June 2nd.
Yeah. How fast did that ship travel?
Uh, the claim is that it could go 18 knots with every boat and screw rattling all the way along, but our normal cruising, because we were an intelligence collection ship, we cruised at about 5 knots.
So
So
5 nautical miles per hour in layman's terms, yeah. So which is
yeah,
a nautical mile is about, I don't know, maybe 1/10 longer than a statute mile, which is what most of us are used to.
yes,
Yeah, something like that. So we're not really looking at some. So you had a pretty long trip across the Atlantic. Probably went faster than the trip that Columbus had, but still a pretty long trip. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, definitely.
So yeah. So how many men were on the Liberty at that time?
294 after we left Rota, Spain. We had started off with, I think, 291, and we
Yeah.
picked up 3 Marines. Um, Actually, we might have picked up a total of 6 people while we were in Rota,
Yeah.
because I know we picked up a couple of civilians as well as the 3 Marines.
Oh, really?
Oh yeah.
I didn't know. Yeah, I didn't know civilians were allowed on a Navy ship. Were they just going somewhere else, or what was the deal with that? Because sometimes civilians
Uh,
can be a liability more than an asset.
the one member of the crew was a civilian linguist, uh, and he had a talent that we didn't currently have on board. So he was sent over from the National Security Agency. Uh, Another member of the crew uh, we were told that he was a Navy third class petty officer, and he turned out to be a CIA representative.
Okay.
So
Yeah. So yeah, and as you pointed, and as we've talked about, the Liberty was basically a recon ship, just a spy ship that was just going there to watch what was going on. It wasn't really there to be offensive or defensive. It was
no,
just to
if
serve as the eyes and ears of the U.S. military.
correct, and the cover story for the American public was that we were going over to be a communications asset for the U.S. assets there in Tel Aviv, and that we would also assist in any evacuation of those personnel if the need arose.
Definitely. So there were 294 personnel. I assume it was almost all men, but yeah, 294 personnel on the ship, and you had this, and it was a how big was the ship about? I mean, how long would you say? It had to be
Uh,
pretty big to have that many bunks on, because it had to have, if it had 294 people, it probably had at least 300 bunks, I figure. But yeah.
yeah, the ship's overall was a converted Liberty ship from an
Mm-hmm.
old cargo ship. I believe it was 361 or 300 and some odd feet long. Uh, that's not much more than a football field,
Yeah.
but it's you know, it was enough for the kind of work that we were doing.
Yeah. Football field with the end zones. Yeah,
Yep.
that's a good, yeah. And they're much longer than they are wide. So
Oh yes.
and the Liberty, had it been in service for a long time, or was it a pretty new ship or old ship, or
It was a relatively new ship. It got commissioned in 1965, uh, and had made one operational cruise prior to the time that I got on board.
what did a ship like that cost in those days? Money. I mean, how much did the Fed spend on that, or do you know?
I don't know. I know that the so-called uh, compensation that Israel provided to the United States for that ship after after all was said and done was somewhere around $6 million. Um,
Yeah.
and of course,
Mhm.
we provide over $6 billion a year to Israel for the what support we get from them. So it's a minor trade-off.
Oh yeah, $1 for 1,000. So
Oh yeah,
so during this time, of course, we know that the USA is already embroiled in the Vietnam War. I don't know if there were any other minor skirmishes we were involved in, but Israel was also involved in the 6 Day War, and that was with Egypt and some of the other Arab countries in the Arab League.
that's
Uh,
correct.
I believe Jordan and some of those other countries were involved as well. But that was that was what was going on. And of course, Israel was still fighting for its independence because Israel was 21, 22 years old at the time as a country. I mean,
Okay.
so so everything's pretty normal on June 6th, June 7th. You didn't really notice anything on those days that was a sign of what was going to happen,
No,
right?
we didn't get on station until the morning of June
Yeah.
8th,
Okay.
and that was 4 days into the 6 Day War.
Yeah.
So I mean, we could see from our vantage point the coastline, and could actually see some of the smoke and that from strafing areas or strafing runs, um, and bombing that they were doing on shore. But yeah, as far as advanced notification, the only indication we had that there was a problem was when we started getting overflown by what
Yeah.
turned out to be Israeli reconnaissance
Okay.
planes.
So where exactly were you located at the time?
We were 12 and a half miles off the Sinai Peninsula, which was still in international waters. And the the unfortunate part of that that side of the story is that we were told after the fact that we were supposed to have been 100 nautical miles off the coast, not 13. Um, and we never got the message that was supposed to reposition us off the coast. Of course, we wouldn't have been able to do our job had had we moved, but
Yeah.
and we were also told that we were going to have Sixth Fleet support, so
Yeah.
that being over in a war zone, we requested and were denied access to a destroyer. We
Yeah.
wanted to have a destroyer escort, and
Yeah.
Sixth Fleet said no. You're a U.S. Navy ship. You're flying the American emblem. You
Mhm.
you don't need an escort. And
Yeah. So yeah, so in this case, you would have been 12 miles north of the Sinai Peninsula because that's where the beach is kind of, and 12 well, you said 13 miles. 12 miles is the limit for international waters. So if you're
okay,
inside 12 miles, you're invading, but if you're outside of that, you're in
right,
water that technically that doesn't really belong to anybody.
correct,
And you were probably pretty close to the, I mean, no and I don't know if you're close to Bir Al Abdi or Al Mazar or Arish or some of these other towns or Port Said or something like that. But you were
uh,
you were in international waters. This would have been off the coast of Egypt, actually, right? Not Israel.
that's correct.
Yeah. So although the Sinai has changed hand, in fact, I believe the Sinai changed hands after this war. So it went to Israel for a while, and then it went back to Egypt. That was kind of a weird settlement where they temporarily gave up the land. But so okay, so June 6th, June 7th seems like it's all a pretty normal day. I suppose sunny weather, cloudy weather, or what
Oh,
were the
no,
conditions
it's sunny, beautiful
like? Yeah,
sunny weather over in the Eastern Mediterranean. Uh,
probably pretty hot.
Hot enough that we had crew members when they were off duty actually going up and sunbathing.
Yeah,
In fact, when we got
yeah.
strafed, the first strafing run,
Mhm.
uh, they sounded general quarters, and we had crew members who had been sunbathing coming down from up above, saying that, hey, we're under attack. Um, and some of them were already shot up pretty good. So
Yeah. So you got it. So June 8th started out as a pretty normal day. You probably got up. I don't know. Just let's just start from the beginning on June 8th and go through everything that happened on June 8th. So
okay, well,
I assume you were working a normal day schedule. You weren't working night shift or anything like that, or
the schedule was what we call a 111 and 32. You'd have one watch on, you'd have a watch off, one watch on, watch off, and then you'd have 32 hours off.
okay.
And during those 32 hours, you do other ship maintenance kinds of things, do the laundry, uh,
Yeah.
take care of, keeping the ship shape.
Yeah.
And,
Hmm.
but
Yeah.
on June 8th, on the morning of June 8th, I got up for a day watch. Uh,
About what time?
would have been probably very close to 5:30.
Okay.
Uh, the watch started at 7 a.m. Uh,
Sun was
so
already up then.
yes, yep.
Okay.
But I'm down in the ship. I'm in the hull of the ship, so I'm not seeing what's going on outside. I I'm monitoring uh, radio communications, high frequency radio communications, and doing what my normal job would be. Um,
How deep was the ship? I mean, how was it? How far was it, say, from the bottom floor to the deck?
Three levels.
Okay. And
So
those aren't high levels by any means. They're probably 7 feet or something like that,
yeah,
right?
something like that. Yep,
Yeah. I mean, they pack you in pretty tight on a Navy ship.
they do.
Yeah. I mean, you usually probably got what, two guys to a bunk or three guys to a bunk or something like that nowadays, or
So they were three high, so you'd
yeah,
have
three high.
a
Yeah.
bottom bunk, middle bunk, and a top bunk. And depending on your rank, depended on which one of those bunks you might get. So
What was the bunk that everybody hated to have, and what was the bunk that everybody loved to have, or did people really care?
I think the most favorable bunk would be in the middle bunk because
Okay.
you could stand and do your you know get your clothes and everything and keep your bunk and
Yeah.
sea bag pretty ship shape. If you're on the
Okay.
bottom bunk, you got stepped on a lot, get because the other guys are climbing up into their bunks. And if you're on the top bunk, it, you had to step on somebody else's bunk in order to get into your clothes and things that are stored underneath where you're sleeping. So there's a metal rack, and you've got a mattress above that, and you lift that metal rack and mattress up and store all
Okay.
of your sea bag, items.
Oh, okay. Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, it's having not been on a Navy ship, it's very interesting to hear that. So you started your day. You were down below doing some. You were down below doing this some recon work. So
Right.
so let's go over what were the first. I mean, apparently the Israeli Air Force started flying around here. When did they start flying around the ship?
Um, they started by 8 a.m. And to my recollection, there were at least 5 or 6 overflights where they had, Navy reconnaissance planes from the Israeli Air Force
Yeah.
um, come in, take photographs of the entire ship. They had jets that flew by, um, and all in all, they just had a very detailed understanding of what the target was. Us being the target, we didn't know that, but
Yeah.
they were doing their homework so that when they came out that afternoon to strafe us and napalm us and torpedo us, they'd have all the information they needed to
Yeah.
make sure that they got the right antennas and the right uh, gun mounts and so on.
Yeah. And what kind of markings were on the USS Liberty? I mean, it was pretty obvious through to the human eye that this was an American ship, right? I mean, what
Oh,
did you have on the ship that said, "Hey, we're Americans"?
okay. On the forecastle or up forward, we had the ship's letter markings AGTR 5, and then across the fantail, which is the aft part of the ship, we had the ship's name, USS Liberty. Of course, you're always flying the American flag, um, and I mean it was. You've heard the term, I'm sure, haze gray and underway. We were typical Navy colors, Navy haze gray.
Yeah, I
Uh,
haven't heard that term actually, but yeah,
okay. It was that was the color of the ship, and Jane's fighting ships, even back then, had us listed. So we know that if you were the intel officer back in Israel waiting to find out what this target was, when they came back with the photographs and their information, they just had to look up in Jane's ships and see that it was a U.S. Navy ship. They did actually have us on uh, their plotting board showing that it was a U.S. naval ship at 8 o'clock in the morning. Now, their watch, I think, may have changed around noontime. I don't know how you know, that information got passed along to the oncoming watch, but someone said after the fact that they removed our pin from their war board, and so they assumed, I guess, that we had gotten out of the area, but they were still doing recon flights up until at least noon, and we didn't get attacked until 1400 that afternoon, which is 2 p.m.
so yeah, so the first Israeli plane flew around at 8 o'clock. So you said you had 5 flyovers, and could you guys down on the boat identify the planes, or did you know they were Israeli, or did you?
Yes, they
Okay,
were clearly marked Israeli planes, and we had a photo recon guy from
yeah,
the ship go up and actually take photographs of their aircraft coming in, um, so that we had a record of who was overflying us. And as a crew member then, early in the morning on the 8th, I felt pretty comfortable knowing that Israel was paying pretty close attention to us, because I thought if anything were to happen, it would be Egypt coming to attack us, not Israel.
yeah. And if you got into trouble, you could send out a mayday, and Israel might help you out.
Exactly.
And obviously you had an American flag on the ship, and
Well, it
you know,
was several of them. So
yeah, and this was and these were just basic. Did you know if they were fighter and the planes flying around? Did they move pretty slowly, or?
well, the recon photo
Yeah,
recon teams, type aircraft,
yeah,
we called them a flying box
yeah,
car, uh, was a slow mover, but the jets that came by were flying at a
yeah,
pretty good clip.
yeah. And there was no radio contact with these planes, right?
No, there was not.
No. What kind of radio contact did the USS Liberty have with have with the rest of the Navy or the rest of the American military at the time? How'd that usually work? Obviously, no cell phones. How did you send these reports back, and how often did you send these? I assume you probably had daily reports or even hourly reports that you had to send back to the Navy, right?
Well, to the Navy and the National Security Agency.
Yeah. How often did you send reports back, and how did you send those reports back?
They were sent by teletype.
Okay.
And so primarily that's the way they were sent. We had, if it was a reportable item that was of critical importance, we would send it back through a defense communication system other than the teletype, and identify what the problem was, what action may or may not need to be taken. So,
who was the first person to get these reports? Where were they, and how often did they get them?
well, it would have been the watch supervisor at the National Security Agency,
Which would have been in D.C. or the Pentagon?
would have been at Fort Meade, Maryland.
Okay.
And those watch officers were positioned in an operations center called NSOC, National Security Operations Center, and so those officers and men in there, men and women both, were responsible for looking at what was going on with the Navy and reporting it up the line to ultimately the director of the National Security Agency. And he in turn would have reported it to the other Pentagon officials and the president, depending on the criticality of the message.
And Fort Meade's not too far from Baltimore, also not too far from Annapolis in Maryland. So yeah,
that's correct.
So obviously also it wasn't too far away from Washington D.C. or the Pentagon. Maybe an hour from the Pentagon, I guess. But yeah,
about that.
At least by car. But obviously, we did have telephones back then. And you mentioned teletypes. That's still like a telegraph system, or?
Yes. Yep.
You're probably still using Morse code back then, I suppose, too.
Yeah. Well, we were. I mean, the radio men were using that. We had more sophisticated equipment to send our stuff.
Yeah. Was most of the communication was it encrypted, or was it pretty wide open that anybody could intercept it and figure out what you were sending out?
Most of it was encrypted, and we'd have to send that information back to the agency for further processing. There may have been some open communications where either voice or a type communication, radio communication.
Yeah.
And we would have a linguist look at those communications to tell us what was going on.
Oh yeah. A typical Navy ship back then, how far did radio transmissions go out? I mean, let's say you're in trouble and you send out Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. How far does that Mayday go? 100 miles, 200 miles?
Oh yeah, it'll go further than that depending on the atmospheric conditions.
Okay. Yeah, and because there's nothing to block it like mountains, but yeah.
Right. I mean, the Sixth Fleet was 500 nautical miles away from where we were at when we sent out our Mayday, and it got picked up by the USS Saratoga, which is one of the aircraft carriers that was part of the Sixth Fleet at that time.
Yeah. Where was the USS Saratoga?
They were back around Italy someplace.
Okay.
And they were at sea. They had been doing nuclear test runs, so they had their aircraft flying regular flight patterns and trying to simulate a nuclear strike if the need arose.
Yeah. And this was a boat. This was an aircraft carrier, so it was a boat that also had had planes on it. So yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so we've kind of I hope everybody can have a picture of what's going on here. You had several flybys. When did the first aggression happen, and what was that aggression?
The first aggression was at 14:05
So about 6 hours later. Yep.
yep, and that was when the jets came in on their strafing runs. So the attack from an Israeli standpoint, using the Israeli Defense Force, was a three-pronged attack. They came in with their jets to knock out all of our transmitting antennas and to
Mhm.
knock out all of our, our 450 caliber machine gun mounts. And then the second wave of those attacks occurred when they sent in bombers with napalm,
Yeah.
and they came in and dropped napalm on the bridge area and the superstructure.
So
And
napalm is a gas. Is that correct, or it's a
it's a liquid,
okay?
and it's you can't get rid of it. I mean, it's like when that hit, it just torched everything in its path.
Maybe like hydrochloric acid or something like that. It just burns everything.
Burns everything.
And so it's like
Um,
fire water. Yeah. I
yep,
just wanted to clarify again because we
yep,
probably got listeners who don't know anything about this stuff. I just want to,
yep.
I'm not may not be asking for me, but asking for anybody else out there. So they had the napalm. Yeah. So and obviously by then the planes that flew around enough probably to figure out, okay, this is where the radio is. So they knocked out your radio transmission immediately.
Yes.
Did you get anything off before that first knockout of the radio transmission? Any
No.
signals to anybody? Okay,
No.
so you never got any. So you couldn't radio anybody, and you couldn't radio them, obviously, and they didn't make any attempt to radio you.
Correct.
And you didn't realize at the time that these were the same planes that had flown over. You didn't realize that these were Israeli
Well, no,
planes,
because
or at
during
least
the
maybe it was just disbelief that you couldn't believe they were Israeli planes.
well, no, the aircraft that did the strafing runs and the aircraft that came out that did the napalm drop were all blackened out. There were no country markings or anything on them to allow you to indicate, okay, yeah, it's Israel. Now that wasn't the case of the torpedo boats when they came out.
Yeah,
They were flying a white flag with a Star of David in it,
yeah,
and it was pretty obvious at that point who
yeah.
was doing the attacking.
Isn't that I guess we would blacking out your nationality, isn't that well, I guess there's nobody to enforce it, but isn't that sort of illegal under international law,
Yeah, I believe it is.
or was at the time? I mean, it goes back to the tradition. Ships of navies were always supposed to fly the flags of the navy, and that's why pirates would fly the Jolly Roger because they weren't affiliated with the country. So they were almost trying to say, "Oh, we're just rogue airplanes flying and bombing you." That's
Right.
yeah,
Um, I think the position from their standpoint was that if we managed to get out a Mayday, um, by having their nationality blackened out, it would be impossible for us to identify,
yeah.
who it was.
So
Um,
how many? Yeah. So how many planes bombed your stuff, and how many planes napalmed you first?
um, I believe it was 4 to 6 planes were doing the strafing runs.
Yeah, strafing is just a term for bombing, or what exactly
uh,
does that word mean?
bombing, and
Bombing. Yeah.
using 50 caliber armor piercing machine guns to penetrate the ship,
Oh yeah.
and
Okay.
then they had rockets that they launched. So
Yeah.
those were the bombs that we're talking about. Them, it's not like they're dropping a bomb on us like they do with the napalm.
Yeah.
Uh, but then the napalm were uh, slower moving aircraft that had come in after any possible uh, effort on our part would have been to repel boarders, not to
Yeah.
shoot down an aircraft, because our our 450 calibers were already taken out of commission.
Yeah, and
So,
you guys didn't really have the capability to shoot down a plane anyway, right? Even
no,
at full strength,
no,
or to take out torpedo boats. So
no.
after these initial attacks with the bombs and the machine gun and the napalm, out of 294 men, how many men did that take out just immediately? I mean,
The
wounded or dead?
wounded or dead
Yeah,
from that aircraft activity, I believe it was nine sailors that were killed during that time.
and they were all
There,
on deck, or
most of them, if not all of them, were on deck. Yes.
mm-hmm. So yeah, so you got the bomb, and then so the bombing, the first bombs came at 2 o'clock. The napalm came at what, maybe 2:10, 2:15, or
Yeah,
I should
that's
say 14 o'clock. We'll go by military time to be
right.
consistent.
Okay. Yeah, it was
Yeah,
14:15 or something like that.
yeah.
14:20.
And
Yeah.
the torpedo boats showed up about when then?
Uh, Probably another 15 to 20 minutes after the napalm.
Okay, so
So
maybe that was 14:40 or something like that then.
yeah,
Okay.
close.
Yeah. Okay, so the torpedo boats, and so they fired 5 torpedoes, but only one of them hit the ship. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Was
The
that the most damaging thing as far as loss of life goes then, or?
Absolutely, the torpedo hit almost a midship
Okay.
on the starboard side, and it put a 29 by 40-foot hole in the starboard side.
29 by inches by 40
20,
inches. Yeah.
no, 29 foot by 40 foot.
Oh my.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
it was huge. It wiped out our communications center. It wiped
Yeah.
out our maintenance center. It wiped out our processing and reporting
Yeah.
center. Wiped out our radio research one that I was talking about earlier, where we
Yeah.
would do our work, and they became flooded immediately. I
Yeah.
mean, we had we had prepared, the ship for watertight integrity.
Yeah.
All of our doors were locked down, um, so that in the event of something like this happening, you could retain the water to certain compartments. So even though 25 crew members were killed with the torpedo hit, the the rest of the ship was able to be secured without further damage to water getting to the boilers. If that had happened, it would have split us in two and we would have sunk. um,
Obviously, you didn't know what was going through the minds of your attackers, but do you suppose they thought that one torpedo hit would have taken all you guys out at the time, and maybe that's what?
I believe that's true. I mean, they knew that they had a direct hit. It was almost at a midship, so your boilers are just aft, a little bit, just rear of where the torpedo hit. And if water had touched those boilers, like I said, it would have split us in two.
Yeah.
So I think it's very possible that they thought they had done their job and they could return to base saying that even though we were still on top of the water, we were defenseless and
Yeah.
you know we were just unable to do anything else to defend ourselves.
How many medical personnel were aboard the USS Liberty at this time? How many doctors, nurses, or anybody else?
We had one doctor and we had two corpsmen, a first class petty officer and a third class petty officer. Um, and Dr. Kiefer was the only one who had the surgical skills to try and patch up some of the more severely wounded. And we had established our mess decks or cafeteria area uh, as a casualty collection station, and the bodies that were being treated were put down the tables, on the mess tables, with those mattresses I was talking about back in the bunk room. You come back out of the berthing compartments, and you'd have mattresses. They might have taken yours, they might have taken mine, just the closest ones that they could get to. They just pull the mattress and put it out on a mess table
Yeah.
so that they could have a triage area.
Yeah, and no guy's going to refuse that if you say we got to take your mattress. He's going to say, sure, take my mattress.
Right,
Because
right.
I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know if any of you, and I don't know, did a lot of you guys know basic first aid or anything like that, even though you weren't officially medics? I mean, it sounds like to me he had to draft some people and turn them into medics, I suppose, on the
well,
fly.
and we all did what we could.
Yeah.
I'm an Eagle Scout. I had the first aid merit badge, and I had, some minimal knowledge of what to do for stopping bleedings and bandaging folks up, but that wasn't one of my primary duties, and it wasn't one that I was tapped into doing. It was one that I voluntarily jumped in to help out because I was in a medical section where the third class petty officer was actually working. And when our postal clerk John Spicer was brought in, he had been out fighting a fire, and he was brought in with shrapnel wounds all up and down his left hand side, um, and they
Yeah.
they needed someone to help try and keep him alive. So we gave him mouth to mouth resuscitation. Then we put in a tube so that we could use a foot pump to do that, get oxygen into his lungs. Unfortunately, he was too severely injured to transport him anyplace else. Plus, Dr. Kiefer already had his hands full with other
Yeah.
casualties. So
I can imagine that, would more guys have survived if you just had more doctors, or,
possible.
and you probably didn't have a whole lot of equipment either. I mean,
yeah. Well, I mean,
supplies or
the 9 that were on topside during the attack, of those 9, possibly more of them would have survived. If the Sixth Fleet had been able to provide us with air support like we were told we were supposed to get, they would have been on board on site prior to the launching of those torpedoes.
yeah.
So that would have saved 25 lives right there.
Yeah.
But again, both of those flights from the Sixth Fleet were recalled. So
Yeah. Well, one of the more heroic stories was somehow somebody managed to get the radio communications working again. Can you tell us about that? I mean, this is one of the more positive stories, one of the more heroic stories to come out of all this.
Yeah, Petty
Who
Officer.
was that? And
Yeah, Petty Officer Third Class Terry Halbardier was an electrician, and he was in the radio shack when the radio men were complaining that, hey, we don't have any communications. And there was one transmitter that hadn't been working for the cruise yet, so it wasn't a hot antenna. And Terry said, "Well, give me some coax cable, and I'll run a line out there, and we'll jury rig up an antenna." And so he went up and was climbing this antenna. He was actually wounded during that effort, but he managed to jury rig up the coax cable, which allowed us to get out on HICOM and get our Mayday out.
So when did you get the Mayday out then?
Probably around 1425 or so.
Okay.
It was before the torpedo attack.
Before the torpedoes. Yeah. Okay.
Oh yeah.
Okay. So that's pretty amazing. So and the Mayday went out to the Sixth Fleet, you said, right? and
Yes.
they acknowledged.
Yes. The USS Saratoga was a USS
Yeah,
aircraft carrier in the
which was in
Sixth
it
Fleet.
near Italy. You said, yeah.
Yep. And they acknowledged receipt, turned it around to the rest of the Sixth Fleet, and so that everybody close enough to provide any kind of assistance was now aware that there was a U.S. naval ship under attack in the Eastern Mediterranean asking for help, and that help was denied.
And they were in Italy. About how far away were they? Miles and also by flight distance.
Um, to be honest, Chris, I don't know. I'm gonna make an assumption and say 100 to 200 miles away.
Well, I'm just saying, look at maps. Italy's a lot further away than that. I mean, but obviously, assuming they were
Oh,
probably down
oh,
near Sardinia or something like that, or
yeah, no, I don't mean the ships themselves.
yeah.
I was thinking how far away from Italy they were.
Oh,
Um,
okay. Oh, okay. They were
n-
200 miles from Italy then. Okay, so they would have
yeah,
been closer then. Okay, so they would have been how far away was the Saratoga from the USS Liberty at the time?
uh, about 500 miles
Nautical or statutes?
nautical.
500 nautical miles. So by boat speed, that would have been probably pretty slow, but by aircraft,
Yeah, we were supposed to have air support within 10 to 15 minutes.
you could have had air
Um,
support within 10 to 15 minutes. Then okay,
yeah,
so those planes went pretty fast. So those planes would have went. Yeah, that would have been pretty fast. Yeah. So and those would have been fighter planes. And so
yeah.
tell us what happened here with your communications with the Saratoga.
Well, initially, they were asking us to um, verify. You have to confirm through a series of code words that
Yeah.
this is all authentic, and,
Yes.
and so you do that. The radio men were responsible for doing that, um, and they have a book, a manual that they pull out, and they say, okay, our call sign was Rockstar, so they were saying Rockstar, we were under attack, uh, and give our nautical latitude and longitude, um, and then it got acknowledged back by the Saratoga, and they said that there was going to be help on the way. And the Saratoga didn't waste any time in scrambling their aircraft to get us support. Um, but unfortunately, like I said, Robert McNamara, Secretary of Defense, called those planes back. And
So they sent out two or three planes, and so what happened? So McNamara called the Saratoga, or what happened?
yes, yeah, called the Saratoga and said, you know, call those planes back. Didn't give a reason for it. Just told them to return to, to deck.
And
Well,
yeah,
what
and how did
what?
McNamara find out?
Well, he would have already gotten what's called a critic message, indicating that we were under attack. That's
Okay,
one of the primary forms of communication. It goes directly back to Washington. The president gets it. Secretary of Defense would get it. High-ranking uh, officers over in the Pentagon would also get it. Uh, National Security Agency would have received that first and passed it along.
what was the initial reaction on the Saratoga toward this order? I said, why are you telling us to go back? I mean, did they ask or did they?
The
I mean, I assume they were kind of shocked by this, right?
they were the pilots were fuming. They were
Yeah.
really irritated with the fact that they had been called out on a live mission only to be called back. So the Saratoga and the America had both been participating in nuclear defense drills with their aircraft,
Yeah.
and their assumption was that the Pentagon and people back in Washington probably felt that the aircraft were nuclear armed, and they didn't want to send nuclear armed aircraft over into the Eastern Mediterranean. Not at that time, anyway. So the Saratoga skipper reconfigured his aircraft, and so did the America, and then both aircraft carriers launched aircraft to come to our defense. Once again, McNamara got on the line and said, I said, recall those planes, get them back on the deck. And Admiral Geiss, who was the commander of the Sixth Fleet at that time, said that he wanted it from higher authority. The only one higher than the Secretary of Defense at that point was the president. So President Johnson got on the line and, in no uncertain terms, said that he didn't care if the ship and everyone on board went to the bottom of the Mediterranean. He wasn't going to embarrass an ally. Now, this is before we actually knew that it was Israel that was doing the attacking, because the torpedo hadn't hit yet. And those 3 torpedo boats weren't close enough for us to get identification on them. All we said when we put out our Mayday was that we were under attack by unidentified aircraft.
Yeah.
So how they knew back in Washington still remains a mystery, and is one of the key things that we're trying to get information on with all of our efforts to talk to the American people, talk to congressmen and senators, and see if we can't get some support there to get a full-blown formal investigation, which has never happened.
What would have been the consequences for defying those orders?
It probably would have been court-martialed, but because they were all, as an aftermath, there was a major cover-up. And so that cover-up, in my mind, those men that subscribed to that were actually, that's a form of treason. I mean, it was, and nothing ever happened to them.
Yeah.
Our skipper, for one, had to modify the deck logs, and his so-called recollection of what happened, and the rest of the eyewitnesses that were up there didn't seem to gel.
So you're saying the skipper of the USS Liberty had to file false reports?
Yes.
So, the one thing though that would have, I'm wondering though if those planes had went anyway and started fighting with Israel, would it have been harder to have covered it up? And I mean, if something like this had gotten exposed at the time, I don't know what would have happened with public opinion at the time. I mean, because the president committed, McNamara and Johnson committed treason.
Yes, absolutely.
And they're both dead now and never suffered any consequences for this.
No, you're right. Yeah, it's I
mean,
that's why we've been pursuing it for so many years, to try and get Congress to still investigate while some of us survivors are still alive, and and can give eyewitness testimony as to what was going on.
Yeah, and I'm here in Austin at the University of Texas as the Lyndon B. Johnson Presidential Library. We got roads named after him. We got high schools named after him.
Yep.
I mean, it's an absolute disgrace.
Yeah, but it's not public knowledge.
Yeah, it's not public knowledge. So by then, the recall of these phone calls happened about when? So that was about when the first phone call and the second phone call, the phone call from McNamara and the phone call with Johnson.
It would have been between 1420 and 1435.
Okay, so by then, after the torpedo boats, that's kind of the last attack then? There's nothing happened after the torpedo boat from Israel? Israel
Uh,
probably kind of left you for dead, or what?
well, Israel sent out a what I'll call a reconnaissance plane with armed military on board, uh, and they came out to survey the damage to the ship, and they had the American attaché from Tel Aviv on board, um, and of course they asked, you know, painful questions like, you know, are there any casualties? Do you require radio assistance? Or can we assist you to shore? And our skipper told them to go to hell.
Yeah, so Israel wanted to offer help, and then he told them to go to hell.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
So after all this, what did you all do after? How did you guys get out of there, and how did you get the ship back to somewhere and get out alive and get to a hospital and stuff like that?
What initially happened was we, the crew members that were still on board, like I said, 70% of us were either dead or injured in some way or
So
another.
30% of the crew. So only 30% of the crew was able to do anything then.
Well, I was part of the walking wounded. I had shrapnel in the thigh, so I was able to help, and anyone who was not critically injured did what they could do to shore up the bulkheads or the walls between the flooded compartments and the after compartments. The next thing that happened was it wasn't until 17 or 18 hours later that we rendezvoused with the Sixth Fleet. Sixth Fleet had sent 2 destroyers to come to our aid first, but again, that was 17 hours or 18 hours after the attack.
Yeah, then they went as fast as they could. Yeah,
right, and that was
recalled. Yeah,
the USS Massey and the USS Davis were the 2 destroyers.
So 17 or 18 hours later, that would have been about 8. Would have been about 8 in the morning or 7 in the morning.
Yep.
So you guys were overnight out there, and you guys did you have any radio? You had radio contact with them, or did you tell them how fast they were? Were you guys able to move at all, or were you just sitting ducks waiting on them to come help?
Initially, we were dead in the water after the torpedo attack, and then we managed to get the boilers online, and we could travel at about, I think, 4 knots, and we were traveling in a zigzag pattern so that they could, you know, get a bearing on us and know who we were. There was at least one other Russian ship in the area. And you know, we didn't have any other Navy ships in the area at the time.
Yeah.
So,
do you think the Russian ship aware of what was going on? Do you think maybe that was what maybe saved your ass? Because obviously they could have reported this if they'd done, but apparently or maybe they didn't know what was going on. It sounds like the Russian ship was just there to spy as well, right?
Right, and they were monitoring us. They did offer assistance, which was refused, but
yeah,
the Russians were actually supporting Egypt in the Middle East War. So during that time frame, I would have been surprised, I guess, if they'd have come in to offer any significant help.
Yeah, and this was, of course, the height, and of course, Vietnam's going on. You know, I don't know how much they were aiding Vietnam, and of course, you know, the state of the Cold War. I don't know, you know, if the Russian offer of help would have been sincere or not sincere.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
I mean, but if they knew what was happening, they could certainly have. If the U.S., you know, if they tried to blame this on Egypt, I can imagine the Russians maybe would have said no, it wasn't Egypt, but who knows?
Right.
It's So you all rendezvoused with those
the
two, the Massey and the other
Davis, USS
Massey and
Davis.
USS
Yep.
Davis, yeah, Massey and Davis. So by then everybody was able to get onto those destroyers and get medical attention if they hadn't gotten it already. And
Well, it was more for security purposes. We had them bring people on board our ship to help us shore up those weak bulkheads that we had.
okay.
You know, you got a lot of water coming in that 29 by 40-foot hole, and we needed supplies to help shore up those weak bulkheads, and medical support is.
Yeah.
But we were waiting for the America and the Saratoga to get there because they had, you know, operating rooms and, you know, regular hospital kind of setup.
Yeah.
So our more critically wounded were highlined off to them,
Yeah.
are flown over by helicopter to get them, you know, the treatment they deserved.
So they didn't get any helicopter flights until almost a day later. How long could the USS Liberty have survived? I mean, it sounds like it would have sunk eventually. You just managed to get it to a place where it was just sinking very slowly.
We by shoring up the bulkheads, we probably could have made it to a port someplace, you know, a friendly port, in a matter of a week to 10 days.
Okay.
But, you know, just like with the ship, instead of taking us to the closest shipyard that was, you know, available, they sent us to Malta. And Malta had dry docks. So, I mean, Malta was in a position so that they could work on the ship and do what needed to be done. But it was, you know, added another 400 or 500 miles to the journey.
What was closer than Malta? Because Malta's south of Italy and
Right.
Greece.
Yeah, Greece would have been closer.
Okay. Yeah, because obviously Egypt wasn't friendly, and you know, I don't know, maybe Turkey, I don't know. Yeah, but you ended up going to Malta. So
yeah,
was Malta independent then, or were they still a British colony at the time?
I believe they were still a British colony.
Yeah, I'm not sure yet. So you ended up. So the ship got out of there, and you ended up. So and I assume you must have been. You never slept that night. None of you ever slept that night. You all must have been on duty for what, 40 hours straight or something like that?
Oh, at least, yeah. I mean, part of it was you were trying to help out as much as you could in the mess decks where our casualty collection station was, our major one. And then there was also the fear of the ship was going to sink.
Yeah.
So most of us still had our life jackets on, and those that weren't currently working someplace, you know, helping out, were probably up topside thinking that, well, if the ship goes down, at least I'm up here, I can hit the water and fight with the sharks. But
yeah, assume you have some kind of lifeboats on that ship too, right, or not?
they were all destroyed.
Okay.
Lifeboats and life rafts were all destroyed.
Okay, so they were all destroyed. So you had to. Then there was no way to recover those. Okay, so.
Right.
Well, yeah, and 13 miles out from Egypt, I suppose if you could have swum, but that would have been a heck of a swim. But anyway, people have swum long. People have swum longer than that. But anyway. But anyway, so you ended up rendezvousing with the Massey and the Davis, and some guys got taken out. How many guys got taken out on helicopters?
I don't have a rough number on that. I don't know.
But how many men died between the attack and, say, you know, in the next week or so, or even a month after, or died as a result of injuries because of the attack that survived for a while?
Well, see, they put a gag order on us.
Okay.
And they basically said that, you know, we weren't to talk about the incident to anyone, um, and threatened us with imprisonment or fines or both,
Yeah.
if we were to do that. So, in their own way, they kept that kind of information, you know, secure.
Okay.
They didn't pass it out. They didn't leak it
Yeah.
out to the rest of us. When we got reassigned after we finally got back to port, um, and got reassigned to our new duty stations, they split us all up so that we couldn't get together as a group and, you know, recap the entire scenario that occurred. So it's just
Yeah.
each individual has their own perspective based on where they were at the ship on the, at that time, and but I don't think any member of the crew would tell you that it was not a deliberate attack. It definitely was a deliberate attack.
So how many dead and how many were wounded overall after all this?
There were 34 killed and 174 wounded. Uh,
And how many also were discharged because of their injuries?
Again, that's information that they didn't
Okay.
disseminate. But
Assuming some were, but yes.
yeah, I know that there had to have been 15 to 20 that would have been medically discharged
Yeah.
for because of their injuries, maybe even more than that. Uh, what happened to it? Oh, there you go.
Yeah. So what was the when was the first time you all got a gag order?
Would have been on the 9th of June. Um, Admiral Admiral Martin came on board and took little groups at a time and talked to them. Uh, Said that he was, just one of us and wanted to hear the whole story. Um, and the when the truth came out, he didn't want to hear it. Basically, you mentioned a fellow shipmate, Phil Turney,
Yeah.
who
Yeah, I
actually
know Phil
had,
Turney and Joe Metters were two guys on that boat. Yeah, Joe seems to
yeah,
be the most out there, but yeah.
yeah. Uh, Phil Phil was actually in one of these groups where Admiral Martin came in, put his collar devices on the table, and said, "Okay, I'm just, just like one of you. Tell me what you saw, what you heard, what you did." And when Phil told his side of it, the Admiral put his collar devices back on, and he says, "I'm going to tell you right now, you're not to say anything about that to anyone, not family, not friends, not you know any relatives. It's and especially not the press." Uh, and Phil didn't understand, but we were all told that over the course of that day. To we couldn't write home about it. Our families were still wondering whether or not we were alive or dead, and all we could do is basically say, you know, yeah, I was injured, but not seriously, and I'll be home as soon as I'm through with my duties here. Um,
Yeah, so that was Admiral. You said Admiral. What was his name again?
Martin,
Admiral Byron. Yeah,
no, Martin,
Admiral
Martin.
Martin. Okay, yeah. So,
Okay.
do you think he was just following orders, or do you think he was? Do you think he's just following orders? Do you think he was a villain as bad as McNamara or Johnson?
Uh, Personal opinion, I think he was just following orders,
Yeah,
but it's hard for me to believe that people as high ranking as vice admirals would subject themselves to treasonous activity.
yeah,
Um,
mm,
and if they were to do anything other than what was being told to them, uh, they would have been court-martialed, would have been, the end of their naval career. Uh, and the same is true of our skipper. the skipper was put in a very awkward position when
Yeah.
he, had to falsify his,
Yeah.
deck logs and
Right.
and basically say that, well, there was this many overflights, and
Yep.
you know there was we actually had a Navy lieutenant who was on board and on topside when they came by and strafed some of the I forget what I was going to call them.
Yep.
They're not. They weren't life. Well, yeah, I guess they were lifeboats. They were,
Yep.
plastic or rubberized life rafts, and the uh, the Israelis actually shot those up. Now we had
Hmm.
offloaded those to to prepare to offload some of our more critically wounded,
Yep.
um, and of course they were shot up, and one of them
Yep.
was actually pulled on board one of the torpedo boats as kind of a trophy, I guess, and you know that was observed by us. It was brought to the attention of the Navy Court of Inquiry when they were called in for testimony, and then it was stricken from the testimony.
Yep.
So
So anyway, so uh, did and was anybody in the administration on your side? I mean, I know Dean Rusk was appalled by this. I don't know how much of an ally he was, but was anybody in the administration saying anything about this? Dean Rusk
um,
was Secretary of the State, Secretary of State at the time.
right, uh, he probably was, but Johnson would have put a muzzle on him.
And
Um, the the admiral that was more closely associated with us and supportive was Admiral Thomas Moore,
yep.
um, and he
Yep.
was a former chief of naval operations.
Okay.
So he was appalled by the activities uh, and the actions of the Navy. Uh, and then Senator Pete McCluskey from California
Yep.
was a strong supporter and still is.
Are he still alive?
Well, I believe he is. I talked with his wife this past year. Of course, he's in his 90s and he wasn't doing well, but he was writing a book. He was writing something up for us, the Liberty Veterans Association, to to have so that we had his viewpoints, his perspective on everything, and his wife was his secretary. So she was doing all the typing. He was just doing all of the uh, recounting of what occurred, what he remembers.
Okay. Yes, Pete McCluskey is still alive. He's also younger than Jimmy Carter, but yeah, he was a Californian from 67 to 83. He was in the
Yes.
House.
Okay.
Uh,
Yep.
so yeah, so uh, I don't know if you guys stayed in contact, but uh, did a lot of people eventually quit because of this, or quit their positions? Or obviously you can't just quit the military, but
Um, I don't know. Again, anything that had to do with the USS Liberty and the Six-Day War was was put in a gag order that I mean, the press didn't report a lot on anything like that. If people were being removed from their office for whatever reason, I'm sure it didn't relate to the USS Liberty, um, only because they wouldn't put that in the press. So if as far as the military members, uh, I'm sure that a great number of our crew got out of the Navy as soon as was possible because of the way we were treated. And the only reason why I stayed in was one, I loved the work that I was doing, and I was hoping that I might get to the bottom of some of this information that was still classified and not being allowed to be made public. So I stayed in support of the National Security Agency for 21 years as a Naval Security Group member, and then spent another 22 years as a defense contractor back here in Maryland, supporting the National Security Agency, and still trying to get information about what what messages were actually received. Um,
Yeah.
you know who was the perpetrator of the initial attack, who was involved in everything, and even with the clearances that I had and the support that I had, uh, I wasn't able to get to the bottom of it. I saw the top secret document that the National Security Agency put out. They didn't put it out until about 1980, and I had a copy of it up until the time I retired in 2008, and the document didn't shed any real light on what what had happened. It didn't. It was more factual information about communications that went awry, um, and factual information about our position, our speed, and things like that. Didn't have any what I would consider classified information that was of any national security level. But that wasn't my call; it was theirs. So I think they put the higher classification on it, just again to keep it out of public realm.
Certainly. So, what else was part of the cover up besides Admiral Martin telling all these guys individually to, or in small groups, telling them to keep quiet?
Well, like I came back to Norfolk, Virginia for my reassignment, um, and I was told by a lieutenant commander there that I was being sent back to Bremerhaven, Germany, which is where I was when I initially got assigned to the Liberty. Um, I was being sent back over there, but that I was still never to talk about this. I was still, you know, required to just keep it to myself. Uh,
And
and the fact that it only made the headlines, I think, for a couple of days, and then it got relegated to a back page someplace or middle of the newspaper, uh, and I think that was Johnson saying he didn't want to embarrass an ally. So if you're a national media outlet, then you better toe the line and not do anything that's going to embarrass the U.S. or Israel.
yeah. So was anybody at the time looking more into this? Aside, you mentioned Pete
Not
McCluskey, but that's about it.
Yeah, no, not that I'm aware of. And
Admiral Moore, yeah,
Admiral Moore commissioned
yeah,
a group of officers to do a comprehensive review of the attack and make a report to Congress. He did that in I believe it was 2003, October of 2003, when he was being honored for his 41 years of military service. And this commission report actually spelled out what these officers were able to determine, that it was a deliberate attack, and that there were multiple overflights, that there were activities that were uh, against international law, firing on life rafts, uh, not offering support to us after the fact. Um, I mean, there was just
Yeah.
several things that they pointed out, and then they made recommendations to the government that there should be a uh, full investigation, um, and that either Congress should do it or that the Navy should do it with congressional oversight.
This was Charles William Moore, Admiral Charles William Moore.
No, Thomas More.
Thomas
Thomas,
More. Okay.
yeah,
Okay.
Thomas
Sorry,
More.
there's several. Yeah, Thomas More. Sorry, there's several admirals out there. Yeah,
Yeah.
Thomas More. Yeah, and and what? I don't think we got the name of your skipper, by the way.
McGonagall, Captain McGonagall.
Yeah, that's right, McGonagall. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, McGonagall. Yeah, he was. And apparently, also he got it. They covered up his medal ceremony because didn't he get the congressional? Didn't he get some medal because of this?
He got the Congressional Medal of Honor.
Yeah.
At a time when all those medals were being presented by the president at the White House.
Yes.
But Captain McGonagall got his presented by a Navy admiral at the naval station in Washington D.C. So he was only allowed a certain number of people that could attend the ceremony. So he had a limited number of invitations that he could offer up. And, I live here in Maryland, so I could have easily made it down to the Navy Yard and gotten to his ceremony had I known about it. But it was just kept out of the public eye.
Yeah. And Admiral Martin, that was Edward H. Martin.
I don't know if that's his first name or not.
Yeah, he was with the Sixth Fleet. Yeah, he was. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, McGonagall. I'm glad he got his medal, although they tried to cover up the medal ceremony, but they still gave him the medal. Is he still alive?
No, he passed about 9 years ago.
Okay, so I think we've covered all the aspects of the cover up. Obviously, you guys were told at the time to keep quiet about this, but when did you all start talking about it? As soon as you got out of the Navy, or when?
No. After Jim Ennis wrote "Assault on the Liberty," the crew started asking questions about. He was a Navy lieutenant. How did he get away with writing a book about the assault with no repercussions as far as we knew, and so at that point, I think people started to open up a little bit. We had a reunion in Washington D.C. in the summer of 1980,
Yeah.
and that was the first time that we had all gotten together to talk about anything. I mean, it was a very emotional reunion for all of us, and now the Liberty Veterans Association, which was formed at that reunion, continues to hold reunions once every 3 years when we train, or we don't train, we actually transfer our officers. Like I was the president of the Liberty Veterans Association up into January, and then I transferred it over to Franco Klassen, who's now taking it to the term of June, and I transferred my position only because I was having medical conditions that would prevent me from doing things like podcasts and other visits to, because I try and be as outward as I can now that I've retired. I'm no longer concerned about fines and imprisonment, although I still hold my vows to keep secret those things that I know to be secret. and
and and
that's
and Captain William McGonagall died in 1999. So
99. Okay.
when did Ennis's book first appear?
It was either 1979 or 1980.
Looks like it's
Um,
been through several editions. I
yeah,
regrettably also saw that it doesn't appear to have a Kindle version, which is unfortunate. But yeah,
yeah, yeah.
that was the first time. Because I have to admit, I know a lot of my history, but I don't believe I heard about this until way past 2000. So I would have been,
Oh,
just something that never got talked about. So James Ennis managed to put this book out, and he was really the first person ever to say anything to. So you never even told your wife or anybody close to you about this, because
no.
uh, did the people close to you at least sense that I think Larry's covering something up here and he's not telling us? I mean, families often have those instincts.
Well,
You know?
they probably did, but they also knew that I
Yeah,
was still active duty Navy.
yeah,
I still had my clearances, and
yeah.
I wasn't going to say anything that was going to jeopardize my career.
Yeah. So you finally got out of the Navy when?
In 2008.
Okay,
Oh
and then
no, and Navy in 1986.
okay, but then you had some other work after that.
Right, yeah,
So
1996, and then I was a
yeah,
defense contractor.
Larry, what do when a kid comes up to guys who are on the USS Liberty and says, "Hey, I want to join the military," what do you tell those kids?
Um, well, I had very positive experiences in the
Yeah,
Navy. Um, I retired as a chief warrant officer, so I came up through the ranks. Um, and the job that I had supporting the National Security Agency was one of the best jobs um, the Navy had to
yeah,
offer.
yeah,
So my comments would probably be more positive than negative.
yeah,
Um, I mean, as much as I still have a lot of animosity towards the Democratic organization that failed to come to our aid back in 1967. Uh, like you say, McNamara and Johnson are both dead. So they were
yeah.
two of the principles that I held in a lot of disgust, I guess.
But every president since then has had the power to look into this, and it doesn't sound like any of them have.
And that that's why I don't understand how Israel got away with murder on the high seas back in 1967, and really we're not punished in any way.
And also at the time, but at the time too. Well, obviously Kennedy was dead. I think Eisenhower was dead.
Yeah,
Uh, I wonder how Eisenhower would have felt about this. I can imagine Eisenhower would have been upset, but
yeah,
I don't know. Uh, I don't know if Truman would have still been alive or not. But but yeah.
yeah.
So who was really going to be a check on this? It's yeah. So who else? Like you said, you mentioned Pete McCloskey, and I just remember one quote from Dean Rusk, but yeah, nobody else anywhere has said anything about this.
Right.
It's almost like you have to be in Israel's back pocket to get anywhere.
And Israel has the United States in its back pocket, so it's
Oh
not
yeah,
like you can't
yeah,
say anything negative to an open press without being called an
yeah,
anti-Semitic, and
yeah,
that's not the case. I have uh, Jewish friends, but I still have a lot of hard feelings about the Zionist
yeah,
Israelis that conducted the attack back in
yeah.
1967.
And has anybody from Israel ever said anything about this?
Um, the there's a newspaper. I don't know. I want to say it's LR0 or something like that. Um, that comes out from time to time with articles, but I don't know that there's anybody in the government that's actually come out with
Yeah.
any firm evidence. There's a an interesting docu-series that we the crew helped to put together 2 years ago. And the docu-series is called "Sacrificing Liberty." The
Yeah.
It's a four-part series, and if you Google that, you'll find that it's available out there. It tells the truth. It gives a lot more insight into what politicians were uh, in Israel's back pocket and which ones were not necessarily. Um, and it also gives a lot of formal testimony from both U.S. government officials and some Israeli government officials. Um, it's when you've got the time, Chris. It's well worth it
Yeah.
to to view that
Hmm.
and maybe get back and say, hey, after looking at the videos, I got these questions also that I want to ask.
Yeah. There's a lot of questions you ask because this how stuff like this happens. I've got friends all over the world too. It's hard to watch, and you can't bring, and you've always got to be able to discuss the what happened in history and who was responsible. We learned many years later that the Gulf of Tonkin was a false flag.
Yep.
I remember I was on a board about 10 years ago or so, and I read this article said, "Hey, did you know there were munitions on the Lusitania when it was sank?" And the Europeans were like, "You didn't know that?"
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
So what did these Europeans know? And I've always been really a strict advocate of neutrality in my entire
Yep.
life. We should just keep our military to defend what we have, and not stick, because if you just end up sticking your noses to beehives, you just get
Yep.
stung. It doesn't really help
Yep.
you much. I've and at the same time I've told I told somebody a few episodes ago on a guy from Georgia, and I said to him, if Russia attacks Georgia, I want to come help you guys because I love that country.
Yeah.
Georgia over in the Caucasus region. So it's you get out there, and so uh, before, did you guys have any reunions before Ennis's book came out, or did you all just kind of
No.
go you just all kind of went your separate ways, and you had this
Yep.
unbelievable secret that you didn't
Yep.
even share with the people you love?
Yep.
Yeah. So Ennis sort of opened the floodgates. Is Ennis still around too, or
Yeah. He's still around. He
yeah? Also,
lives out.
that's spelled Ennes, James Ennis. Yeah, he's still running the website with Joe. So
Right.
yeah, I remembered some of the other names involved. So did anything happen after that after the book came out, or not really? Just you got a
I,
little press attention, but that was about it.
yeah. That was about it.
Yeah, nobody talked about it.
No.
If of all the presidents that are still alive, I suspect the one who'd be most sympathetic would be Jimmy Carter, but he's just checked into hospice, unfortunately. But
Yeah.
I don't see how the Bushes, no way, that would be a
No.
lost cause. Uh, Clinton, no. Obama, no, forget it. Trump,
Yep.
no way.
Yeah.
I no Nobody else has wanted to look into this ever since then. Of course, now with
Nope.
it just gets harder to look into. It's kind of unfortunate. And it also sounds like, from what I hear, you guys have been somewhat snubbed by the American Legion as well. Is that right or not?
Yeah. No, that's true. They have a national convention every year,
Yeah.
and we, as an organization, have asked to have a booth at their national convention so that we could tell the story and provide literature. Some is free, some is these books like Jim's book and others would be available through that media. Well, In 2013, two of our crew members who were representatives for the American Legion National Convention arrived on site to find out that the uh, the site organizer um, had not received our $1,000 check, and that was an oversight on our comptroller's part. She thought she had sent it, and they said, well, irregardless of whether or not you've got it, we'll put it on our credit card right now, just so that we can have our booth and put up. And they said no. It got to be kind of a belligerent situation, and they called the local police in to escort our two crew members out of the facility. Um, and any attempt on our part to get back in has been snubbed by the American Legion. Now, that doesn't mean, in my mind, that they don't recognize the fact that we're all, you know, veterans,
Yeah.
and that they should take a more positive approach and allow us to attend these, you know, these functions so that we can get our word out. But their position is they've had enough problems with the organization. They don't want to have any more to do with it. We've been you know, restricted for life from attending the National American Legion Convention. Now I'm I'm a life member of the American Legion. I can go to the American Legion Convention as an individual, but I won't be able to set up a table and have my literature laid out there uh, to share with other veterans. And that's how we were getting the word out. And one of my efforts when I was the president was to get a resolution passed for um, getting a USS Liberty Remembrance Day. One day a year, June 8th, 1967, but one day a year on June 8th, um, have that recognized nationwide as USS Liberty Remembrance Day and do it from now until forever. Um, and at the National Convention, I had literature, you know, explaining what it was I was asking for and in the proper format, and getting people to sign up to approve it and say, well, I'll take it back to my state. And I got all 50 states representatives to tell me that they were going to, go forward with this. And I heard nothing, nothing. It's been dead silence. Um, so the closest thing that happened to help us, I guess, was in I want to say 2017, um, when the commander of the American Legion uh, was approached with a resolution, Resolution 40, which asked for a full uh, congressional investigation, uh, asked for, uh, let's see, some sort of support to the crew members, um, and it didn't spell out the restrictions about our not being able to come to the convention again as an organization, but it was more leading up to let's let's get the facts out on the street so that people are aware of this incredulous act that occurred back in 1967
Yeah.
that just hasn't been reported.
Yeah, it hasn't been reported. Although with the podcasts and other shows out there, it can certainly get it out there a lot more than it was out there, and of course books.
Right.
Yeah, yeah. Tell James Ennis, by the way, to get his book out on a Kindle. It's still only in paperback and hardback. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, I've more or less given up buying books anymore because
Yeah.
they're heavy and they take up too much space, and
Yeah.
uh, so yeah. But you have gotten a much better reception from the veterans of foreign wars. I've also heard too, right?
Well, again, initially, both organizations, went on record to support, a uh, full investigation by Congress to have them, review the attack, the aftermath, and have it publicly, acknowledged. Um, the the American Legion had three or four resolutions that addressed the attack, and were calling for the investigation. Um, and then the VFW had at least two that I'm aware of. Uh, and Now the VFW still allows us to come to their national convention and put out our literature, and they haven't shied away from us being part of that national event.
Yeah. So one thing, has anybody had any repercussions for talking about this, or not?
Once again, I think because of the gag order, you don't hear
Yeah.
about it. I mean, I
But none of you. But it sounds like you guys doing a lot to keep in touch or not?
yeah, well, I mean we've got phone numbers and contact information for those of us that are still active, and
Yeah.
the that hasn't stymied us from talking about it amongst ourselves.
Yeah.
Uh,
I guess they could take your vet benefits away,
I suppose, yeah,
but they haven't done that. So
not yet.
how many of you all are still alive right now?
Good question. I think it's in the neighborhood of about 140.
Oh, really?
Yeah, yeah. I think it's over 100.
Because most of you would have been born in the 40s, right?
Right. Yeah. I was
Yeah.
born in 46. So
Yeah. So most of you in your 20s at the time, or were there some older who are some of the longtime veterans on board?
um well,
The
obviously this,
McGonagall, yeah,
yeah, I was going to say the skipper. Um and then we had some chiefs who were
yeah,
on board. They would have already spent, 12 to 15 years in the Navy, if not more.
yeah,
Um and I was 21 at the time, and I was one of the older ones in my group. So, the
yeah.
younger ones were, 20, 19.
Okay, yeah,
Probably had some 18-year-olds. Uh, but the older guys would have been the higher ranking uh, petty officers, like the
yeah,
first class, Jeff Carpenter,
yeah,
Ron Kukul, and some of these
yeah.
guys.
Guys who the only home they knew was mom and dad's house, and they just went into the Navy. Yeah,
Yeah, pretty much.
you had to be 18 to get in, right? Or could you join at
Yes.
17 or 16? Okay,
I think you could have joined at 17 with a parental signature.
yeah,
At 18, you could do it on your own. I know that was the case in New York. I don't know if
yeah. Well, okay, so that was well, it's how do you feel about what's been going on with the U.S. military since then? Are you?
I'm disappointed.
Yeah,
I mean, I feel that the it's almost more like a civilian job anymore. I mean, you've got certainly ranks and rates that require you to be on call 24/7, uh, and those kinds of positions require a, I don't know, a pretty healthy mindset. People have to be dedicated to their mission, and we've got those kinds of people in the military. But what bothers me is that because of what happened with the Liberty and the admirals, senior naval officers would allow themselves to be dictated to cover up what actually happened. And I mean, every one of them would have been, charged with treason.
Oh yeah.
So um, and it pains me to think that maybe those kinds of things happen more often than we know. And so I
No.
guess I still hold the government as the culprit here. The military was just following orders.
Yeah, and well, just look at how those people got abandoned in Afghanistan.
Oh yeah, yep.
I mean, which obviously isn't a safe place to be. It really makes me wonder, who you can really trust in something like this, and if you can't trust
Hmm.
the and what I hear so many times, they try to take vet benefits away from these guys for whatever reason, or they try to work out a way that they don't get their benefits. Because we got a lot of people here. I mean,
Oh yeah.
how is this? Has this? I assume if you don't want to go into detail on this, but how has this impacted you guys psychologically? I mean, it's had to have had some kind of impact. It certainly
Well,
kills your patriotism, doesn't it? I mean, do you even want to stand for the anthem anymore after something like this happens, or
oh yeah, I'm a patriot.
Yeah,
I'm a life member of the VFW, a life member of the
yep,
American Legion, a life member of the Disabled American Veterans,
yep,
uh, life member of the Purple Hearts,
yep.
um, and so I still love this country and love what it stands for, but I question a lot of the things that are happening that
Yeah,
make me shake my head and thank God that I'm not currently on active duty, because as an officer you'd be in a position to influence a lot of your junior personnel. Um, I don't know that I could be open and honest with them about my personal feelings. The psychological aspect of all this was that I myself suffer from post traumatic stress
yeah,
disorder, um, and probably the majority of the crew is suffering from that, whether they know it or not.
yeah.
Um, when you have to keep that bottled up inside for 50 plus years, I mean, that's how long I kept it bottled up. I,
Oh yeah,
I wasn't talking about this until 2015 or 2016. I mean,
yeah,
not out openly like I am now. Uh,
yeah.
so,
Shared pain is lessened. Shared joy is increased. It's
yep,
yeah.
yep, yep.
And if you weren't even talking about it among yourselves, it's a
Yeah, we've all got the same pain, same memories, and
yeah,
a lot of the psychological,
yeah.
neurological
Oh
issues
yeah.
that you'd have. So
Yeah, and the fact is they should all give you guys a parade. It's
yeah.
that I mean that doesn't change everything, but it'd be
Well, the
you guys are all heroes. I mean, just for the amount, the effort you guys put in to get out of there alive and do all this stuff. I mean, there's a lot of heroism here, and then you get stabbed in the back by the people who are supposed to be on your side.
yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
I agree. Well, I
Well,
think yeah,
yeah,
I thank you for allowing me to share some insight into what happened back in
yeah.
1967,
I
and
Yeah. Well, that's when I started this podcast. That was one of the first things I says, I got to get a USS Liberty guy on here. I don't care who it is, but I'm going to get somebody.
Yeah.
Thanks for taking your time to talk. And we'll probably, please subscribe to this channel. Please hit the like button. Please, check out my novel, Escape from the Village, and go back and watch some other shows and follow me on Twitter as well. The Fountainhead Forum is on Twitter. And this is the story of the USS Liberty. We'll raise a glass to the men who are gone, and remember them, especially Captain McGonagall, who led you guys through all this. He had to be a real tough son of a bitch, and I mean that in a positive way. But good for him, and good for all you guys. So thanks for all you guys did for us. And
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Thank you.
you.
Bye bye.
Bye now.